What would you do if, on the day of your daughter's graduation, your husband of nearly 3 decades stood up in front of family and friends and announced he was leaving you for another woman? For Victoria Hayes, that betrayal wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of her deadly game of revenge. Victoria Hayes had spent nearly 3 decades living in a carefully constructed life of stability, sacrifice, and quiet devotion. A life built around her husband, Richard Hayes, and their daughter Sophia. But everything collapsed on the very evening that should have been their brightest celebration when Sophia graduated with honors from university and a banquet hall filled with family. Friends, colleagues, and well-wishers raised their glasses in her honor. Richard lifted his champagne glass, and instead of offering words of pride or affection for their daughter, he calmly declared that he was leaving his wife to begin a new life without her. The words cut through the air like shattered glass. The sound of forks against porcelain stilled the murmur of conversations died mid-syllable, and 50 pairs of eyes turned toward Victoria, waiting for her to crumble, waiting for tears or rage or chaos. Yet she smiled softly, congratulated him on his honesty, kissed her daughter, his cheek, and walked out, leaving behind a silence so deep it... If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe for more chilling narrations, and ring the bell so you never miss the next tale of betrayal, suspense, and revenge. Share this video with someone who loves a twist they'll never forget. Ledgers, recordings, photographs, legal documents prepared by her attorney, Jonathan Clark, every detail aligned like the tumblers of a lock ready to seal Richard, is fate. And as he shouted after her, his voice high-pitched and cracking, Victoria allowed herself the smallest smile, knowing that the man who thought he had control was already unraveling later when she entered their stately colonial home, the house where they had built memories for 15 years. She found his suitcases, hidden in the closet, neatly packed, ready for the grand departure he had planned. For the following day, he had intended to make a scene to abandon her publicly, to shock her into silence, but Victoria had beaten him to the strike. She had already filed papers. She had frozen accounts, she had secured assets, and she had gathered. The one weapon Richard had foolishly forgotten existed: the prenuptial agreement, signed almost 3 decades ago at his own insistence, an agreement that contained a fidelity clause ironclad and eternal. Richard believed it had expired long ago, but Victoria knew better, and she intended to wield it like a blade when Richard returned. That afternoon his face flushed, his suit disheveled, his hand clutching the envelope as if it were a grenade. He could not throw, he raged, demanded, cursed, yet Victoria remained composed, reminding him with calm precision that every betrayal had been documented, that every transfer was traceable, that every whisper of deceit had been captured, and that the very document he had once forced upon her to protect his imagined wealth would now strip him of everything when he blustered that history should matter. She countered with the truth that his betrayal was no mistake, but a year-long conspiracy. When he accused her of cruelty, she revealed the recordings of his own voice plotting to humiliate her in public, and when he attempted to appeal to sympathy, she reminded him that even his sister Margaret had turned against him. After catching him with Olivia at last year's holiday party, his bravado cracked into desperation, then into rage, then into silence, yet the unraveling had only begun. Because Richard's carefully balanced double life started collapsing from every angle. Olivia discovered the separate account he had hidden from her when Victoria revealed it, and passing cracks of mistrust split between them. Margaret confronted him with disgust for betraying not just his wife, but his daughter and Sophia. Once the truth reached her, could no longer view her father with the same innocent admiration she had carried through childhood. The confrontation came swiftly. Sophia, still in her graduation dress makeup, streaked from tears, walked into Margaret's living room where Victoria had taken refuge and demanded the truth when her mother explained the affair, the financial deception, the planned spectacle. Sophia's face hardened into a fury Victoria had never seen before. She realized then that her daughter had inherited her resilience combined with her father's fire, and the combination made Sophia formidable. When Richard arrived later, dragging Olivia into Margaret's house to demand compliance, he found not the obedient family he expected, but a wall of resistance. Sophia standing tall, Margaret unwavering, Victoria calm and silent like a storm on the horizon. Richard pleaded, threatened, argued, but the more he spoke, the more Olivia realized he had deceived her as well. The apartment lease he promised her had never been approved. The funds he had sworn would secure their future were frozen. The glamorous life he had painted was crumbling into dust. In that moment, Olivia began to retreat from him, her eyes shifting her stance uncertain cracks spreading through their alliance while Sophia's voice cut through him with icy truth, condemning his theft of family money, condemning his betrayal, condemning his cowardice. Richard left that night defeated but not destroyed, whispering that it was not over yet, and Victoria knew he meant it, because men like him could not accept defeat easily. The days that followed built toward the preliminary. Hearing 3 days later, and every hour was thick with tension. Richard scrambling to contact lawyers calling in favors, trying to access funds that no longer obeyed his command. Olivia questioning every lie, Margaret and Sophia rallying around. Victoria as she prepared for the confrontation in court. Augusta's skies opened with rain the morning of the hearing as if to wash the city clean of deceit. And when Victoria entered the courtroom, flanked by Jonathan Clark and her daughter, she felt not fear but clarity. Richard sat at the opposing table, his hair unkempt, his suit. Ill-fitted, his eyes burning with venom, but beneath the surface trembled the fear of a man whose empire of control had collapsed. The judge presiding listened as Jonathan laid out the case transfer, by transfer document, by document, voice recording, by voice recording. The picture painted was undeniable. A husband who had siphoned funds, plotted betrayal, and violated the fidelity clause he himself had once demanded. Richard's defense faltered, his arguments weak, his attempts at justification unraveling under the weight of evidence. Even Olivia was called her testimony, hesitant, her demeanor shaken. The judge's gavel fell, and with it, Richard's fortune, his authority, his carefully constructed facade fractured into ruin. Victoria walked from that courtroom into the storm outside, the rain cold against her face, but her spirit unbroken, her silence more powerful than any outburst she had endured. Humiliation she had endured, betrayal, but she had endured and prevailed. Richard glared from the steps, his whisper carried across the rain-soaked air. This isn't over. And though she knew she had won, she also knew that a man stripped of everything could be more dangerous than ever. And as she looked at Sophia's determined eyes and Margaret's unwavering support, she realized that while one battle was finished, the war was only beginning. Richard Hayes left the courthouse that day drenched in rain and disgrace. Yet fury still burned inside him like a storm that refused to die. The humiliation of being outmaneuvered by Victoria, his wife, the woman he had dismissed as predictable and submissive, now haunted him every step as he paced inside the dim apartment he had tried to secure with Olivia Reed, but the emptiness around him mocked his failed promises. The lease had never gone through, the furniture was missing, the glamorous life he painted had dissolved into shadows and silence. Olivia stood near the window, arms crossed, her eyes sharp with questions she had once looked at him with admiration, perhaps even love, but now suspicion hung heavy between them. Victoria had not only destroyed his financial hold, she had poisoned the trust Olivia once had in him. With every secret exposed, every account revealed, cracks spread wider. Olivia began to see that she had been another pawn in Richard's endless appetite for control, her voice low, her questions pointed. Richard tried to charm his way back, tried to convince her that Victoria had spun lies, but Olivia had her own doubts. She remembered the expensive gifts, the weekends away, the whispered promises that never quite materialized now. She wondered whose money had paid for those gifts, whether it had been stolen from the very family he betrayed. Her silence cut him deeper than accusation. Still, Richard would not admit defeat. Instead, he plotted obsessively, papers scattered across the table, numbers written in frantic scribbles, phone calls to bankers, lawyers, old business partners, but each conversation ended in dead ends. The accounts were frozen, the assets untouchable, the prenup airtight. Jonathan Clark had left no weakness. Richard's pride twisted into paranoia. He began to believe everyone was against him. Margaret, his sister, who had once adored him, now sided with Victoria. Sophia, his daughter, who he had believed would always defend him, now looked at him with contempt. Even Olivia pulled away each day, growing colder, more distant. He told himself he had been betrayed by them all, but in truth he had betrayed them first. Victoria, meanwhile, remained steady, living quietly with Margaret, focusing on Sophia, who, though hurt beyond words, found strength in her mother's resolve. Their bond deepened over late-night talks, wine, glasses clinking in the lamplight as rain tapped the windows. Sophia confessed how much it hurt to see her father revealed not as a hero but a coward. Victoria listened patiently, offering no false comfort, only truth. The pain would linger, but so would resilience. Sophia's anger sharpened into determination. She vowed to support her mother in every step ahead. Richard sensed this shift, and it enraged him. He had lost control over his wife. his finances, and now his daughter. Desperation drove him to reckless acts he began following. Victoria's car at night parking outside. Margaret's bungalow watching the lights flicker through the curtains. His obsession. Consuming him, Olivia confronted him about this madness, warning that it was dangerous, that it made him look weak. But Richard dismissed her. He was convinced Victoria was plotting, more convinced that Jonathan Clark and Margaret were conspiring to ruin him. Completely. He even believed Sophia had been turned against him deliberately. Paranoia became his constant companion, and with it came a dangerous hunger for retaliation. Victoria knew he was watching. She sensed his presence in the shadows, but instead of fear, she used it. She allowed him to see glimpses of her strength walking with Sophia, confidently entering Jonathan's office with purpose, carrying herself with a calm that mocked his unraveling. Each sighting pierced his pride further. He began drinking. Heavily, his calls to Olivia turning into rants, his words slurred, his anger spilling. Olivia grew tired, her patience breaking one evening. She packed a bag and left him, saying she refused to be collateral in his war against Victoria. Richard begged, cursed, threatened, but she walked away, her footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. The slam of the door, final and cold, now isolated. Richard's desperation sharpened into rage. He began sending messages. To Victoria, long rambling notes filled with accusations, threats, and pleasome pages confessing his love, others cursing her existence. Jonathan advised documenting every message. Margaret insisted on increasing security. Sophia, though shaken, remained composed, reminding her mother that fear was what he wanted. Victoria read each letter with steady eyes, never responding, never giving him the satisfaction of reaction still. The tension grew. Days bled into nights, the looming final hearing approached, and Richard knew if he lost there, everything would be gone forever. The house in Augusta, the property in Savannah, the retirement accounts, all of it slipping from his grasp. He could not let that happen. He convinced himself. There had to be a way to break Victoria, to force her into submission. He remembered the one person she loved most, Sophia, and in the dark corners of his mind, a new plan began to form. Victoria sensed this too, the way his words circled around. Sophia in his notes, the bitterness that spilled when he mentioned her loyalty, the fury at being rejected by his own daughter. Victoria grew more protective, checking locks, double-bolting doors, accompanying Sophia wherever she could. The once calm streets of Augusta no longer felt safe. The war was moving into more dangerous territory. One evening, as thunder rolled across the sky, Victoria sat alone in Margaret's sunroom, staring out into the storm, her mind tracing every step, every move Richard had made, and she knew with chilling certainty that the man she once loved was transforming into something darker. Not just a husband scorned, but a predator cornered and desperate. And she whispered to herself that the fight was not over, because men, like Richard Hayes, did not fade quietly. They lingered, they struck back, and they waited for the moment when you believed you were safe before they destroyed everything. The storm that had begun in the courtroom spread into every corner of Richard Hayes' fractured life as days stretched toward the final hearing. He became a man haunted by shadows, pacing empty rooms, drowning in empty bottles, his thoughts looping like a broken record and always circling back to Victoria Hayes, the woman he believed had stolen everything from him. In truth, he had destroyed himself, but pride blinded him to that reality, and so he convinced himself that if he could not win legally, he would win by breaking her spirit. He parked his car outside Margaret's quiet bungalow night after night, his headlights off, his figure barely visible among the trees, watching the windows where sometimes he saw Sophia, his silhouette moving, or Victoria sitting with papers in her lap, or Margaret watering her plants. He watched and told himself he still held power, that his gaze alone could unsettle them inside. Victoria felt the weight of his presence. She did not need to see him to know he was near. The silence of the night carried his obsession like static. In the air, she tightened security, checked the locks twice, made sure Sophia never walked alone, but she refused to cower. Fear was his weapon, and she would not hand it to him still. Sophia felt the strain. Her once bright laughter dulled, her trust in her father broken beyond repair. Yet her resolve hardened. She attended strategy meetings with Jonathan Clark, her eyes sharp, her notes precise. The daughter Richard once called his pride now stood as Victoria's shield, and Richard could not bear it. Paranoia poisoned him deeper. He began believing Jonathan Clark was not just an attorney, but a rival, plotting to steal his family, his wealth, even his daughter. He scribbled furious accusations in notebooks, his handwriting jagged, his logic unraveling, when Olivia Reed briefly returned to collect belongings. She found the apartment littered with papers, maps, of Augusta, with markings photographs of Victoria leaving offices, Sophia, walking across campus, Margaret at the university. Olivia recoiled, realizing Richard had descended into obsession. When she confronted him, he erupted, spewing venom about betrayal and conspiracies, and she fled, terrified of the man she once thought charming. Richard's isolation deepened, yet his fixation grew stronger. He began calling Victoria's phone late at night, leaving voicemails of silence broken only by heavy breathing or muttered words about history, loyalty, betrayal. Victoria saved them all, each one a nail in the coffin of his crumbling defense. Margaret urged her to press charges immediately, but Victoria insisted patience would serve. Her better the law moved slowly, but it moved with weight, and she would let Richard hang himself with his own madness. The days before the final hearing were thick with dread. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of headlights outside set nerves on edge, but Victoria held steady. Sophia, though restless, leaned on her mother, drawing strength from the calm that had carried her through decades of storms. Then, one evening, as the rain hammered down louder than ever, Richard made his boldest move. He followed Sophia after she left a late study group at the library, his car crawling behind, hers headlights dimmed, his mind racing with thoughts not even he could control. Sophia noticed the shadow in her rearview mirror, heart pounding. She drove not home, but to Margaret's house, pulling quickly into the driveway and running inside. Richard's car idled across the street for an hour before disappearing into the night. The message was clear. He wanted them to know he was close. He wanted them to feel hunted. Victoria met her daughter at the door, calm but resolute, holding her close, whispering that he would not break them, but inside her fury burned, colder than any fear. By the time the day of the final hearing arrived, Augusta was wrapped in heavy clouds, the courthouse looming like a fortress of judgment. Victoria dressed in quiet elegance, Sophia at her side, Margaret close behind, Jonathan Clark carrying folders thick with evidence. Richard arrived, disheveled eyes, wild tie crooked, his energy volatile like a man teetering on the edge. Olivia appeared too, but no longer at his side. She sat at the back, her expression distant, her loyalty severed. The hearing began, slow, deliberate. Every detail recounted: financial transfers, exposed recordings, replayed, Richard's own words damning him. The judge watched silently as Jonathan Clark laid the pieces one after another, a puzzle of betrayal and deceit that could not be denied. Richard shifted in his seat, sweat beading his forehead, muttering under his breath when it was his turn to speak. His words spiraled into rants about conspiracies, betrayals, even accusing Margaret of conspiring with Victoria. His sister's eyes narrowed, cold fury flashing. Olivia was called to testify, and with reluctant honesty she confirmed the dinners, the jewelry, the promises, the whispers of a new life. Richard's face twisted with rage, veins standing out as he realized the woman he had chosen over his wife now helped seal his ruin. The judge's gavel struck, the sound echoing like thunder through the chamber. The ruling fell swift. The prenup upheld, assets awarded to Victoria, accounts secured. Richard left with only a fraction of the life he had once controlled. His empire crumbled, his pride shattered. Yet, as Victoria walked from the courtroom, Sophia steady at her side, Margaret resolute behind her, she knew this victory was not the end, because Richard's glare followed her, burning with venom, his whisper barely audible yet sharp enough to cut through the storm. "This is not over," he vowed. And though the law had stripped him bare, Victoria understood a desperate man with nothing to lose was more dangerous than ever. The courthouse doors closed behind them, but the battle did not end with the sound of the gavel. It only shifted into something darker, because Richard Hayes, stripped of wealth, stripped of respect, stripped even of the fragile alliances he had built, was now a man with nothing to lose, and a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous of all. He wandered the streets of Augusta like a ghost, his clothes wrinkled, his hair unkempt, his eyes burning with a fire that frightened even those who once called him friend. He spoke to himself, muttering fragments of arguments he had lost to the walls of bars and diners, his notebooks filled with erratic scrawls, numbers, arrows, names underlined so violently the paper tore through in his mind. Victoria had not only humiliated him, she had orchestrated a grand conspiracy. Jonathan Clark was her puppet, Margaret her accomplice, Sophia her weapon, Olivia her decoy. Richard saw betrayal everywhere, but he refused to see his reflection in the ruins he had created. Olivia tried once more to reach him, pity more than love guiding her steps. but she found him pacing the empty apartment talking to shadows, his hands trembling his words, a string of venom that no longer carried sense when she told him to let go, to move on. He erupted in fury, hurling a glass against the wall shards. Scattering like the remnants of his sanity, Olivia fled and never returned. Richard, now fully alone, sank deeper into obsession. He followed Victoria from a distance. Her every movement catalogued, he scribbled times, dates, places, convinced that if he found the right pattern, he could expose her imagined plot one evening. Sophia noticed him outside the courthouse, his figure half hidden by a pillar, his eyes fixed on them as they left with Jonathan Clark. She told her mother, her voice shaking. But Victoria only placed a steady hand on her shoulder, whispering that fear would give him power and they must not yield still. She could not deny the unease that curled around her heart. She knew Richard was unraveling into something unpredictable. She bolted the doors tighter, checked the windows twice, made sure Sophia never traveled alone. Margaret insisted they hire private security, but Victoria refused, believing that the law and her own vigilance would be enough. Yet deep down she wondered if she underestimated the desperation of the man she once shared her life with. Richard's obsession reached its peak the night he broke into the old family home, the house now under Victoria's name. He wandered the halls in darkness, his footsteps echoing against memories, every photograph removed, every trace of him erased. He touched the walls, whispering that it was his, that it would always be. His rage rose until he smashed a vase against the floor, screaming her name. Into the emptiness, neighbors reported the noise. Police arrived. But Richard slipped away, leaving only broken glass and the chilling echo of his presence. Victoria was informed, and though she did not flinch outwardly, she felt the weight of his escalation. She knew it was only a matter of time before his obsession turned violent. Sophia confronted her, asking why they could not leave. Augusta, start over somewhere far away. Victoria answered with quiet steel that running would mean surrendering. And she had surrendered enough already. She would not let Richard dictate one more chapter of her life, so they stayed. Margaret vigilant, Sophia restless, Jonathan cautious, yet life tried to resume classes, resumed work, resumed dinners, resumed, yet beneath every ordinary moment lurked the shadow of Richard Hayes, and the knowledge that he had not let go. The final blow came weeks later when a package arrived at Margaret's house. No return address. Inside a single photograph Sophia captured on her way home from class, the picture, grainy but clear enough to know he had been there, watching close enough to touch the message scrawled on the back. 3 words, "This is war." Victoria held the photo in her hands, her heart pounding, yet her face calm. She placed it back into the envelope and set it on the table, her eyes meeting Sophia's and Margaret's, both of whom waited. In breathless silence, she spoke only once, telling them that fear was what he wanted, and they would give him nothing. But she knew then with chilling certainty that Richard was not finished, and that victory in the courtroom had not ended the war. It had only awakened the predator within him. And as night fell across Augusta, the storm clouds gathering once more, Victoria stood at the window, her reflection staring back at her, knowing that the man she once loved was now a shadow circling closer each day, and that the silence before the strike was the most dangerous silence of all. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to stay connected.